In 1978, Juarez cartel hitman Rafael Enrique Clavel murdered the two children of Sinaloa cartel drug lord Hector Palma while Palma was in prison. However, when Palma got out and found out about the death of his children, he retaliated in a way that not only changed Clavel's life forever, but also harmed his family in ways that even Clavel would have never imagined. Here are the craziest cartel member executions made by parents.
Most Americans know of Pablo Escobar.
Right.
Well, she was there before Pablo Escobar on a much larger scale. Pablo Escobar was stealing cars when she was already trafficking 3,400 pounds of cocaine in the 70s and 80s.
In 1983, Dario Sepulveda, the husband of Colombian drug lord Griselda Blanco, kidnapped their son after Griselda found out he'd been unfaithful. So outraged that her husband would endanger their child to escape the consequences of his own actions, Griselda decided to have him killed. However, her plan for revenge didn't unfold as expected. It only put her son in harm's way, but would also put Griselda herself facing grave danger. Now, before we get into these details of how it all unraveled, it's important to understand that Griselda's decision to eliminate her husband wasn't unprecedented. In fact, it was a recurring theme in her life as she'd been married many times, and her choices were deeply rooted in the turbulent life she'd led. Now, forget that dramatized Netflix crap. There are more than a few inaccuracies in that portrayal of her life, starting with her childhood and growing up. In reality, Griselda Blanco was born in Colombia on February 15, 1943. After her father abandoned her, she relocated to Medellin with her mom, who was reportedly this abusive alcoholic worker. Now, her childhood would be marked by hardship and poverty, driving her to allegedly engage in and pickpocketing at a very young age. According to a story referenced by Britannica, an 11-year-old Blanco once assisted in kidnapping a boy from a very wealthy family and later shot him when the ransom wasn't paid. Now, by the age of 13, she began living with this guy, Carlos Trujillo, a forger and a pimp who would become her first husband. Now, the pair had 3 children, Dixon, Ubed, and Osvaldo, all born before Blanco turned 21. In 1964, the family would move to New York, where Blanco started selling marijuana. After a while, the relationship deteriorated, and by the late 1960s, she and Trujillo had separated. Allegedly, she arranged for his murder in the early 70s. But after divorcing Trujillo, Blanco would marry Alberto Bravo, cocaine trafficker, and together, they established a highly successful drug operation, using Bravo's clothing import business in New York as a front. Now, Blanco would launch a lingerie factory in Colombia, cleverly modifying garments with compartments designed for smuggling cocaine. Known for her innovation, she would recruit female smugglers, believing they could evade detection more easily when traveling. At the height of their operation, Blanco and Bravo reportedly managed a network of around 1,500 drug dealers and worked in collaboration with Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel. Now, although Blanco and Bravo's business thrived, their marriage took a dark turn when Blanco suspected Bravo of stealing from her. After the pair had returned to Colombia from the U.S., where they were facing drug charges, their relationship ended violently. Blanco killed him in a shootout in Bogota in 1975, a clash that also claimed the lives of 6 bodyguards. Blanco herself was injured in that firefight, suffering a stomach wound from Bravo's Uzi. Now, this violent episode, combined with the earlier killing of her first husband, earned her the ominous nickname, the Black Widow. So following Bravo's death, Blanco would take her 3 sons to Miami in the late 1970s and begin constructing an empire that would make her infamous. The reputation for brutality would grow quick, and she became a central figure in the cocaine cowboy wars, a time and place marked with public gunfights and other acts of extreme violence across Miami. It was at this point that she was seen as a complete sociopath, killing indiscriminately, whether it be over a debt, a botched shipment, or even a displeasing look. In 1978, Blanco married her 3rd husband, Dario Sepulveda, and together they had a son, Michael Corleone Blanco, named after Al Pacino's character in The Godfather. By this time, she was generating around $80 million a month from her smuggling empire, and that operation was so lucrative that she was offered $15 million just to relinquish her territory in the early 1980s, a deal that she would flatly refuse. Blanco and her family lived extravagantly, but her displays of power were often terrifying. She allegedly hosted orgies at her Miami mansion, forcing individuals at gunpoint to engage in sex, and ordered the murders of 8 strippers others, who were reportedly involved with her husband. In addition to dealing drugs, she was also a heavy user herself, which may have fueled her reckless and violent behavior. One particularly tragic incident would occur when she ordered the assassination of former cartel member Jesus Chucho Castro. That attack mistakenly claimed the life of Castro's 2-year-old son Johnny instead. Sepulveda and Blanco's marriage eventually crumbled under the strain of their drug smuggling empire, and by 1983, Sepulveda fled to Colombia, leaving Griselda behind, but taking their son Michael with them. Griselda was determined to have Michael by her side, while Sepulveda wanted their son to attend school. When she refused his request, the husband took matters into his own hands and brought Michael to Colombia. This act, which she viewed as a kidnapping, made Sepulveda her target. Reports suggested that she orchestrated his murder. Having him shot in his car, with Michael seated beside him, was soon returned to Griselda in the U.S. In 1984, Blanco would move from Miami to California, attempting to evade her rivals in the drug trade. However, law enforcement was closing in on her, and by 1985, after a decade-long pursuit, DEA agent Bob Palumbo arrested her as she was convicted of conspiring to manufacture, import, and distribute cocaine, receiving a 15-year prison sentence. Blanco faced additional charges in 1994 when she was accused of 3 counts of first-degree murder in Florida. Ultimately, she pled guilty to second-degree murder, aided by her associate Jorge Rivi Ayala. Ayala was the key witness in the government's original case against Blanco, but the trial unraveled after it was revealed that he had engaged in phone with several secretaries in the prosecutor's office. Blanco was given 20 years for those murders, to be served concurrently with her earlier sentence. In 2004, she was released early from prison due to her poor health and deported to Colombia. Blanco spent her final years in Medellin, where on September 3, 2012, she was shot twice in the head outside a butcher's shop by a masked man who fled away on a motorcycle. Blanco was 69 years old at the time of her death.
She was killed by a motorcycle assassin going into a butcher shop. There's so much irony in there.
Exactly. Well, so much irony because she basically invented that kind of execution.
Griselda Blanco's 3 older sons, Dixon, Uber, and Osvaldo, followed in her footsteps, becoming traffickers themselves. Osvaldo and Dixon were even in prison at the same time as their mother and were paroled in 1992. Osvaldo was killed later that year in a Colombian nightclub, and Dixon and Uber were killed before Griselda herself. Her youngest son, Michael, is still alive. He gained some fame as a cast member on VH1's Cartel crew and now runs the lifestyle brand Pure Blanco. Back in 2011, Michael was arrested for attempting to buy 5 kilos of cocaine from an undercover officer. He was charged with drug trafficking and conspiracy, pled not guilty, and was under house arrest awaiting trial when his mother was killed a year later. Now, Michael and his wife Mary are suing Netflix and the creators of that series, Griselda, claiming that they used recordings of conversations Michael had with producers, ideas they say were documented in notes and writings, without compensating him. Well, whatever the outcome of that lawsuit is, it's undeniable that his mother was one of the most cold-blooded drug dealers the world had ever seen.
Ayer fue detenido Hector Palma Salazar, alias El Güero Palma, como resultado de un operativo conjunto entre el Ejército Mexicano y la Procuraduría General de la República. El Güero Palma encabeza uno de los 4 cárteles de droga más poderosos de nuestro país.
Hector Luis Palma Salazar's story is a haunting tale of ambition, betrayal, and unimaginable loss. His rise as a powerful cartel leader was overshadowed by the tragic death of his wife and his children, and while that in itself is horrific to imagine, the true horror comes from the fact that the man responsible was a close associate of his, Clavel. For context, Salazar was born in La Noria de Abajo, Mocorito, in Sinaloa, Mexico, sometime between 1950 and 62, and nobody knows the exact year. Growing up in poverty, Palma would face immense hardships himself. Family financial struggle would force him to drop out of school before completing primary education. Determined to help his family, though, he turned to petty crime, beginning with car theft. His knack for criminality attracted the attention of Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, one of Mexico's most prominent drug lords back then, better known as El Jefe de Jefes, the boss of bosses. So now under Gallardo's wing, Palma's criminal career career flourished. Initially employed as a sicario for the Guadalajara cartel, he quickly gained a reputation for his efficiency and ruthlessness. Recognizing that potential, Felix promoted him to manage the logistics of his drug shipments across the U.S.-Mexican border. Now that role marked Palma's ascension within the cartel hierarchy. His intelligence, ambition, and capacity for violence earned him that prominent position in the Sonora region, overseeing vast drug trafficking operations. And even though the Guadalajara cartel disintegrated in the late 1980s, Palma's influence continued to grow. He forged strategic alliances and began asserting his independence, positioning himself as a major player in Mexico's burgeoning drug trade. Now, Palma's most significant partnership was with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, and these two, both former associates of Felix Gallardo, would unite in effort to establish the Sinaloa cartel. Alongside Ismael Zambada Garcia and the Beltran Leyva brothers, they would form La Federación, a powerful drug trafficking organization. Palma and Guzman would share visions and ruthless tactics, helping the Sinaloa cartel become one of the most dominant criminal organizations in the world. That partnership was further solidified by their mutual enmity toward the Arellano Felix brothers, who controlled the rival Tijuana cartel. Now, the competition between these two groups would later erupt into one of the bloodiest conflicts in the Mexican drug war. So the breakup of the Guadalajara cartel in 1989 marked the beginning of a violent power struggle. Palma's decision to keep the proceeds from a drug shipment led to accusations of betrayal by Felix Gallardo. The rift would ignite a war between the Sinaloa cartel and the remnants of the Guadalajara cartel, as well as their allies, the Arellano Felix brothers. The conflict reached a fever pitch with acts of extreme violence, including the murder of Cardinal Juan Jose Posadas Ocampo in 1993. Though the killing was initially blamed on El Chapo, it did underscore the escalating brutality of the feud. Now, by 2002, the death of Ramon Arellano Felix at the Mazatlan Carnival symbolically marked the end of this phase of the war, as well as Palma's illustrious career. Back in 1995, Palma faced his first major setback when a plane he was traveling on crashed. While recuperating in Guadalajara, his ostentatious lifestyle, including a golden pistol, would draw a lot of attention from law enforcement. He was arrested and sentenced to prison for drug trafficking and organized crime. During this time, Palma's personal life took a devastating turn. We have Rafael Clavel Moreno, a Venezuelan enforcer associated with the Arellano Felix brothers, entering Palma's life under the guise of a business partner. In reality, this person had only one mission: to push Palma beyond the point of sanity. Rafael Clavel started the mission by seducing Palma's wife, Guadalupe Lea Serrano, leveraging his charm and manipulative tactics to convince her to leave her husband. Clavel persuaded her to withdraw 2 million pesos from Palma's accounts and flee to the U.S. with their 2 children, Hector Jesus and Natalie. Once in San Francisco, Clavel's betrayal escalated to this unimaginable level. He brutally murdered Guadalupe and decapitated her and sent that head to Palma in a cooler, accompanied by a chilling note mocking his inability to protect his family since he was incarcerated. The nightmare spiraled further into darkness as Clavel would abduct both children and take them to Venezuela. There, in a calculated act of psychological torture, he would throw Hector Jesus and Natalie off the La Concordia Bridge, leading to their horrifying deaths. And adding to that horror, Clavel would film the act and ensure the footage reached Palma, magnifying his torment. This series of unfathomable cruelties left Palma shattered and consumed by this desire for revenge. In simpler terms, he wasn't ready to go down without a fight. So once Palma got out of prison, his response was swift and merciless. With help from El Chapo and trusted allies, Palma meticulously orchestrated a series of retaliatory strikes by ordering the of Clavel's family and associates, ensuring no one involved in that betrayal or even related to those involved lived to see another day. Clavel himself was arrested in Venezuela for the gruesome murders of Palma's children. However, the legal system's punishment wasn't enough for Palma, so instead he told his guys on the inside to take Clavel's life in a cruel fashion. Yet Palma's relentless pursuit of vengeance wouldn't stop there. He directed his fury toward 9 key associates of Felix Gallardo, systematically eliminating them as part of this broader campaign to avenge his family. But after all those involved in his family's demise had been killed, Palma's troubles continued. In 2007, he was extradited to the U.S., where he was convicted of cocaine trafficking and sentenced to 16 years in prison. He served 9 years before being released in 2016 for good behavior. Upon his return to Mexico, he was immediately rearrested for the murder of a judicial officer in the 90s. Now he remains incarcerated at the Altiplano prison near Mexico City. May 8, 2008, Edgar Guzman, El Chapo's hand-picked successor, met a violent end when sicarios from rival cartels ambushed his vehicle, unleashing 500 bullets. However, before diving into those details, it's crucial to understand why his demise was seen as a karmic payback for his father's actions. While El Chapo's name is synonymous with the suffering he inflicted on Mexico, today's focus is solely on the Beltran-Leyva cartel, the group behind Edgar's murder. Cartel rivalries are common, but the roots of this particular conflict lay in El Chapo's betrayal. Now, he struck a covert deal with the DEA and Mexican law enforcement, trading intel on top drug lords in exchange for immunity for himself and his Sinaloa cartel. That deal led to the arrest of Alfredo Beltran-Leyva, a key leader of the BLO, and 11 of its elite sicarios. Though not officially documented, many believed El Chapo orchestrated Alfredo's capture, as he was among the few who knew Alfredo's whereabouts. Now, the betrayal would incite the BLO brothers to declare all-out war on El Chapo, their first act of retaliation targeting his son. Born in 1986, Edgar was groomed to succeed his father, but unlike his siblings, El Chapo kept him out of the cartel's affairs until he completed his education. And by 2008, Edgar began dabbling in the trade, producing his first gram of cocaine paste and trying his hand at the family business. Unfortunately, he would lack the street smarts needed to navigate the dangers of cartel life. Now, despite the warnings from his father to stay in Mexico due to threats from the Beltran-Leyva cartel, Edgar ended up traveling to Chicago with his cousin, Cesar Ariel Lora Guzman, and his girlfriend to sell the paste. After a successful deal, they returned to Culiacan, unaware of the grim fate awaiting them. Now, while driving back to El Chapo's base in a red SUV, the trio stopped at a shopping center for groceries. Moments after stepping out, they were ambushed by approximately 40 gunmen. Edgar and his cousin were brutally gunned down, with reports claiming over 450 bullets were fired. A bazooka was even used in here. The BLO denied involvement, spinning the narrative that El Chapo's own men had mistakenly killed Edgar, confusing him with someone known as El Guacho. But El Chapo knew better. This was no accident. Consumed by grief and fury, El Chapo retaliated viciously. He first honored Edgar with a lavish burial, buying every rose in Culiacan for the funeral. He unleashed a brutal campaign of vengeance, reportedly ordering the deaths of over 116 people in May 2008 alone, followed by 128 in June and 143 in July. Now, despite that bloodshed, nothing would ever ease the pain of losing his son. At Edgar's burial, his mother, Griselda Lopez Perez, delivered a poignant speech that left attendees deeply moved. "I'm tired as a mother of having my children pointed out as drug traffickers. I have lost a son to the wars they provoked." What would you do if you saw your own daughter get abducted by this evil man and no one was willing to help get her back? You'd go to the police, probably child services or something, and none of them are doing anything about it. And the worst part is you know where her abductor lives, and you hear that she's being trafficked for exploitation. While we leave you to make up your mind on that one, this was the exact situation Barry and Lupe found themselves in after their daughter was abducted back in 2012. Barry and Lupe started dating back in high school, and they stayed together for a couple of years. They never officially got married, but they did have 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. Now, the name of the girl is protected, but the family would live in San Francisco, California. And around the time their daughter was 17 years old, Barry and Lupe noticed that she was acting kinda strange. First, she started staying out really late, and then she would come back and lock herself indoors. This would force her parents, though, to break into her privacy a little bit, where they saw what I call every parent's nightmare. They logged into that computer and found that she was selling herself online as an escort through Twitter and these online ads. When the young girl came home that night, parents confronted her about what they saw and decided that they'd send her to her uncle's place in Los Angeles. Now they thought they solved a problem. problem, but it only made it worse. When she did get to LA, she met a 22-year-old pimp named Calvin Sneed. Sneed would manipulate the young girl into becoming a roadside call girl, and then would take almost all the money she made. Her uncle reported back to the parents about her late-night shenanigans, which her parents in turn reported to the police. But the police weren't too thrilled about this case because there wasn't a lot of evidence available to arrest Sneed. So they take it one step further by reporting the girl to several missing and exploited children registries and services, and again, it was to no avail. At this point, Sneed had become her pimp, and no matter how much they tried getting her to step away from him, she just went back. So it is at this very moment that her parents decided to take things into their own hands. May 27th, 2012, Barry and Lupe stationed themselves along the Vineland Avenue in North Hollywood, waiting for Sneed to pass by, as this was his usual route when trafficking their daughter. Probably feeling like a modern-day Bonnie and Clyde, they got a gun, deciding they're just gonna kill Sneed, but at the end of the day, these guys weren't criminals. So when Sneed actually showed up at that location, Barry fired from his 9mm and missed terribly. Sneed got injured, but had no idea that it was the girl's parents who were after him. If he did, he wouldn't have made the grave mistake he made next. June 2nd, 2012, Sneed and the couple's daughter returned to San Francisco to visit Sneed's ailing family member, and since her parents' house wasn't too far away, she visited him to let him know that she was around but would be staying with Sneed and his family in the area. This was the perfect opportunity to strike again, so the couple grabs another gun and traces their daughter down to Sneed's apartment. Once they got the location, they come back on the 4th of July to carry out this assassination. It was like a scene straight out of an action movie. The mother waits down the street, watching when Sneed's gonna leave his apartment. At around 1:57 a.m., she calls Barry to give the signal, and at 2 a.m. sharp, Barry drives his gray Mercedes-Benz SUV and mercilessly shoots Sneed dead, right in front of the apartment. The daughter witnessed the whole thing, and afterwards, she called the cops on her parents, and they were arrested. June 8th, 1999, Anjanabai Borkar's daughter, Asha Bhagat, was raped, murdered, and mutilated at the hands of a Kasturba Nagar gangster, serial rapist, and murderer named Bharat Kalikaran Yadav, or Aku Yadav. For over a decade, the women of Kasturba Nagar endured suffering inflicted by Yadav. Men from the outside of the town would hesitate to propose marriage, fearing that these women had been victims of his abuse, a fear justified by a reality that's really messed up. Yadav violently assaulted these women at will, subjecting victims and even their mothers to with no one to intervene. On random nights, he would barge into different homes, demanding money and forcefully taking their women. And if anyone ever talked to the cops, he'd be laughed at or chased away from the station. And if that sounds crazy, well, it is, but there's a reason behind that. Now, in India, admitting to being is considered taboo, but despite that, many of Yadav's victims bravely reported that crime. But for every time he was arrested, he was almost immediately granted bail. Shockingly, the police would then give him the details of whoever made the report against him, for Yadav to then retaliate against that person. These corrupt officers would accept bribes in exchange for protection. When one of his victims reported being raped by Yadav, police accused her of having an affair with him and dismissed her complaint. Several others were also sent away after being told, "You're a loose woman, that's why he raped you." This guy was out of control, but he couldn't have his way with one woman, and that is Anjanabai Borkar's daughter, Bhagat. Now, Bhagat was a mother herself and worked in a shelter for the poor and the disadvantaged. She stood up for everyone who had been tortured and beaten by Yadav, and was the only woman who could outrightly accuse him of his depraved acts. And as such, he started seeing her as a thorn in his side that he needed to get rid of. On that fateful day, Yadav ambushed Bhagat in her own home. He killed her and then instructed his men to mutilate her body. This horrific crime prompted Anjanabai Borkar to report the incident to the police. Now, given the severity of the crime, Yadav was arrested. However, to the dismay of many, he was only sentenced to 16 months in prison before being released back onto the streets. Anger and frustration are words that really can't express the emotions of Borkar, knowing that the very man who killed her daughter was now back on the streets doing the same thing to almost every other girl out there. Borkar knew that this man had to be stopped. She needed to end his days of terror, and it was at this moment that she resolved to seek justice for her own daughter. In 2004, Yadav found his next victim, an educated lady named Usha Narayani. Narayani had helped a lady file a case against Yadav for her, and in turn, Yadav and a few of his men would surround Nadayani's home post-midnight and demanded that she let him in. Usha would refuse and instead responded by dragging a cooking gas cylinder to the door, opening that valve, and threatening to light a match to set herself and anyone else in close proximity on fire. Yadav and his gang retreated immediately, and her actions made it clear to the people of Kasturba Nagar this man could indeed be stopped, only if they fought back violently. Nadayani, Anshanabai Borkar, and over 200 women would come together to orchestrate Yadav's murder. Nobody was afraid anymore, only really frustrated and determined. By August 6, 2004, these women marched to Yadav's home, but by the time they got there, he'd already been arrested, or maybe perhaps taken to safety by his police buddies. But the following day, he appeared before the Nagpur District Court, coming out of his cell to meet more than 500 residents of this town, comprising of men, women, and children who would cheer in victory for his arrest. Yet Yadav would swear that he would return to teach every woman of the slum a lesson, and he was on the verge of doing so after the court agreed to grant him bail pending his trial date. That was the last straw. Anjanabai and her compatriots would storm the court, but this time they're holding vegetable knives and chili pepper, and as they spot him in the courtroom, they splash him with the pepper and start stabbing him from all angles. And because of the number of women involved here, the officers guarding him ran away. Within 15 minutes, Yadav's lifeless body lay on that courtroom floor, a scene dripping with irony, for the murder had occurred within the very heart of justice itself. Nevertheless, his death didn't bring closure for these women. 5 of them would be arrested as the main attackers, and Anshanabai Borkar was one of them. But in a twist, every woman living in the locality would claim responsibility for the lynching, and when the cops refused to release the 5 alleged culprits, a crowd of 400 women and more than 100 men and children would gather at the courthouse to support the women. The crowd comprised residents of other towns as well, and we had high-profile lawyers who would also refuse to move until all 5 women were granted bail. A district judge immediately moved the motion for the bail to be posted, but it wasn't until 10 years later, in 2014, that all charges against these women, including Borkar, were dismissed on account of inconclusive evidence. Now Anjanabai Borkar raises her granddaughter all alone, knowing that she wouldn't face the same threats and abuse all these women faced at the hands of Yadav. April 18, 2008, Culiacan, Sinaloa, Mexico. Assassins from a Mexican cartel ambush and kill 20-year-old Atanasio Torres Acosta, son of famous drug lord LM1. After his son's death, LM1 lived for only one purpose: to enact revenge. February 28, 1958, LM1 was born in Cosala, Sinaloa, Mexico, and does share familial ties with Javier Torres Felix, also known as LJT. Now, JT maintained a close friendship and partnership with Ismael Zambada, a prominent figure in the Sinaloa cartel's hierarchy. Now, it's evident that LM1 would grow up in an environment surrounded by firearms and narcotics due to that association. However, as he matured, he eventually entered the ranks of the Sinaloa cartel himself. Now, during the 90s, LM1 ascended through the cartel's ranks, but his true mettle was tested when his brother, Javier, faced arrest by Mexican authorities. On January 27, 2004, Javier was apprehended at his residence in San Miguel and subsequently extradited to the U.S., facing charges related to drug trafficking. With his brother's absence, LM1 was entrusted with a critical responsibility, overseeing the transportation of cocaine from South America into the Mexican states of Chiapas and Oaxaca. Now, that role was of utmost significance, elevating his standing within the cartel. He would collaborate closely with El Chapo's son, Ovidio Guzman Lopez, solidifying his power further within the organization. Nonetheless, this prominence also made him a prime target for their arch-rivals, the Beltran Leyva organization. Now, these adversaries took the responsibility of transforming LM1 from a typical drug dealer into a ruthless, murderous figure. How, you ask? By killing his son during the BLO Sinaloa drug war. April 18, 2008, dramatic incidents unfold at the Montebello residential district of Culiacan, right outside the health ministry. LM1's 20-year-old son, Torres Acosta, found himself in a dire situation when a group of BLO sicarios launched a surprise attack. Torres wasn't alone. He was with his sister Alondra and LM1's sister-in-law, Rivas Heredia. The sicarios tried kidnapping Torres Acosta, but he resisted, making him open fire fire and killing him on the spot. The shots fired hit the girl on her right arm and shoulder, while his sister-in-law got hit on the left leg. After killing Torres Acosta, police found the escaped vehicle used by the sicarios, and inside that vehicle was the major thing that made LM1 lose his mind. On behalf of your friend and his nephews Los Zetas, so you can understand Manuel Torres. In the days that followed his son's tragic death, LM1 took a disturbing turn. He told his men to round up every member of the BLO and Los Zetas cartel that they could find, and then subjected him to unimaginable torture at his ranch. It was during this period that the true extent of his psychosis emerged. He subjected each one of them through brutal torment before ultimately executing them in cold blood. One of his victims would be a municipal police commander, Roberto Carlos Barcelo Villagran, who endured a very gruesome ordeal. This guy's back was mercilessly sliced with knives, the legs all and he was also beheaded while he was conscious, an appalling act that really defies comprehension. They would take his lifeless body, along with two others, and dispose it in a trunk of a vehicle, while the sicarios would then scatter the remains of other victims throughout Culiacan. Despite the initial carnage, the cycle of violence didn't abate with the deaths of a few individuals. In fact, with each act of retribution, LM1's emotional instability intensified. Additionally, the ongoing feud between the BLO and Sinaloa cartels would spiral out of control, leading to further bloodshed. M1's ruthless methods earned him the moniker El Ondeado, signifying the descent into madness. He took the lives of 30 BLO sicarios and ordered the deaths of hundreds more. The city of Culiacan was a nightmare. Lifeless bodies were scattered everywhere, at every turn, filling up the blood-soaked streets. In response, the Mexican government would dispatch 2,000 troops in September 2008, and the operation played a pivotal role in LM1's eventual downfall. By September 2008, authorities raided one of LM1's safe houses, uncovering firearms, narcotics, and an armored vehicle. Most importantly, they found a photo featuring LM1 alongside Misael Torres Urea, also known as LM2. Misael Torres was LM1's nephew and the son of Javier Torres Felix. That image would circulate throughout the media and further expose LM1 to danger. In 2011, he officially found himself on the U.S. government's blacklist under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. There were only two ways to get off that list: prison or death. No middle ground. So you would think at this point he would try to keep a low profile, but the man had already succumbed to a profound sense of apathy. He didn't give a damn about the U.S. government coming after him, and maybe, just maybe, his lack of care was what led to his death. By October 13th, 2012, in Oso Viejo, Culiacan, Sinaloa, LM1 was in a convoy with his bodyguards when Mexican federal forces stopped him on the road. They tried to escape, but they were surrounded. And what LM1 and his men didn't know was that the Mexican military had figured out exactly where they were hiding just a few days before. The soldiers were posted all over the city, making sure that he was not leaving. So in the middle of this, he would get out of his... LM1 jumped out of the vehicle and ran for the hills, but he didn't get far. The man was shot and killed before he could get anywhere. But as a way to remember and honor his son, whom he had started all the violence for, LM1 was buried at a cemetery just outside of Culiacan, where his son Antanasio was also laid to rest.